Good morning. It's Friday, May the 8th, 2020. It's the birthday of Elkton, and we're going to celebrate the birthday today, and it's also our bicentennial year, 1820 to 2020. We apologize to anyone watching this video. Our intent was to have a live stream at 10 o'clock, but due to technical difficulties, that didn't work. We're going to try to figure out what happened. And Gary, you know, it worked yesterday, didn't work today. But we're going to welcome Gary Violette today. He's our Todd County historian, and he's going to give us some of Elkton's history, and we're going to spend some time talking about that. We'll talk a little bit about our bicentennial. And again, I apologize that we're not live, but you can watch this video at your leisure. And because it's going to be so good, Gary, they can watch it over and over again. So welcome, Gary. We appreciate you taking time today to tell us about the history of Elkton and some about Todd County. So let's hear what you got to say.
Well, this is a big day, and I'm glad to be with you, Mayor. Thank you. My notes are sketchy, especially on the very early parts of Elkton's history, but we know from previous historians that the place was there, of course, before many people were. In my childhood, I can remember finding arrowheads along Elk Fork Creek in the fields after they had been plowed. And asking about this, I was told by some of the older residents that Elkton started right where the Russellville Road Bridge is, just east of Public Square, or East Main Street, on East Main Street. At that time, the natural creek we call Elk Fork made a bend right where the bridge is, and it was very shallow with what's called a lick. As the creek turned there, it would wash up minerals on the bank, and it happened to be a place that was very easy for bison herds that were migrating in their seasonal pattern from north to south to cross the creek. And the minerals that would come there would invite them to stay, and also elk herds were said to enjoy the lick. And of course, that's where Elkton eventually got its name. This same buffalo trail, or bison trail, by 1815 was part of a wagon trail between Russellville and Hopkinsville. And settlements sprang up at Whippoorwill, Daysville, and Fairview, about every 5 miles along the road. So after Daysville, you would stop at Newburgh, what was called Newburgh then, and you could rest, get water, maybe stay the night, depending on what kind of travel you had made that day. But travel was very difficult in those times, using these old bison trails. There was no Elkton, really. But by 1816, we've gone from the 1700s to the 1800s now. By 1816, this what had been a buffalo trail had really turned into a national post road. And this is really the first government that came to this part of the country, which was then Christian County. And on 10 June 1817, the Elkton Post Office was established. So Elkton wasn't really formalized, but it did have a post office by 1817. John Gray had been given a large tract of land in the area for his service in the Revolutionary War. And by 1818, he had built what's called the Nick and Will House, where Latham Funeral Home is now. So we have a burgeoning community with shops and the like, and actually kind of a hotel there at the intersection of Allensville Street and Russellville Road. And that's really Old Elk Town, as it was called. In March 1819, the first plat was drawn by Thomas Garvin and Thomas Jameson. They laid out 18 lots, which really formalized what was then just rough country into this town, Old Elk Town. And then by 1819, enough people had gathered in the area that Todd County was considering being formed. And John Gray proposed an addition on what was his land, actually a cornfield, west of that first plat that was made. And in December 1819, the Kentucky legislature established Todd County and named Elkton as the county seat. By 16 November 1820, John Gray's plat for the first edition had been recorded, which grew Elkton by 251 lots, and most importantly, located the public square in his cornfield. And this had really been the key thing that had made Elkton where it is today, because he offered to donate the land in the middle of what is now public square for the courthouse that would be the county seat of Todd County. So that helped Elkton beat out any of the other towns in the area that were already established. By November 1820, Elkton got busy and built a log jail over on what's now Jefferson Street. And getting most important things done first, they built what's called a stray pen on Trader's Alley, because animals would go stray in those days, and they needed a pen so they wouldn't wander too far. On 18 November 1820, Elkton had two more additions, 9 lots on the south and 56 east of the original plat. Now, some of those were never developed as single lots, but obviously in 1820, Elkton was growing. And its establishment as the county seat was recognized by the Kentucky legislature on 9 December of 1820. And in 1821, on John Gray's land, he built what was the first brick courthouse on Public Square. And it was finished the next year, which was 1822. And this really is the end of Elkton's first phase of beginning. And it was marked by our founder, the patriot John Gray's death on 18 November 1833. He did get to see Elkton become the county seat, the courthouse built, original courthouse built, and Elkton really growing into a real town. By 1835, a new phase of growth was happening in Elkton. And that year was when the second courthouse, the 1835 courthouse that we're all familiar with, was erected on Public Square. That same year and into the next year, the Elkton Green River, in Elkton, the Green River Academy was established. And so Elkton not only has government, but it's beginning to have a burgeoning education element to it, to the community. And along about this same time, the elk from which Elkton took its name ceased to be in Kentucky. They were all hunted out. So things were changing. And of course, we all know the middle of the 1800s, there was the Civil War. And Elkton, of course, had people fighting on both sides. Our residents went to fight for the Union and for the Confederacy. And on 3 December 1864, General Lyon's rebel force brought 2,500 Confederates to lodge at Elkton. And they were followed on the 8th of December in 1864 by Bridgewater. So here we are in December 1864, and Elkton is really a Confederate camp. We believe they lodged in the courthouse on Public Square. They took up, these generals took up their residence upstairs where the courtroom, excuse me, where the offices had been, and they lodged their horses in the courtroom on the first floor. And by the war's end, when all of this was over, the public officials deemed the 1835 courthouse unfit for use. And it stayed that way for some time until money could be gathered for its recondition. In 1869, the brick jail was built. And this is another major step in Elkton's growth. In 1875, the jail was put to use because there was a period called the Troubles in Elkton, which was marked by KKK activities in the county. And so Elkton was a place where trials of these people were held, and others that, came into conflict with the residents. And that really ended the second part of Elkton's history in Todd County. By 1880, the troubles were with the KKK and the aftermath of the Civil War had diminished somewhat, and the citizens went back to growing their town again. And I'm told the first maple trees were planted around the courthouse, the public square at the courthouse, and down the main streets in all four directions from there. In 1880, by the way, that was the same year Weather's Drugstore opened on the north side of Public Square. So it's really beginning to be a prosperous community. The big thing that happened in the late 1880s was Elkton built a two-story public school on Washington Street. And this shows another commitment to education in the county that this small community made, because at the time there were a series of one-room schools. There was the Greenwood Academy, of course, but Green River Academy, excuse me. But most of the schools were just one-room schools or frame buildings. But Elkton built this quite magnificent edifice on Washington Street next to the depot for the E&G Railroad. The depot and the railroad opened on the 1st of February in 1885. And by 1886, it handled 13,124 passengers. Now that's the 1 year of 1886, and 5,292 tons of freight. So it took a long time for the rail to reach Elkton, but when it did, it was really taken to heart by the residents. And again, roads in that day were mud, hard to pass, and so the railroad really opened up Elkton to the rest of the nation. There were setbacks, of course. In 1886, high winds spread a fire from Jenkins Hotel on the northwest corner of Public Square eastward. It burned down the entire northwest side of the square, traveled to the east side where the hotel that we know today, its predecessor, a frame building, stood, and it took out that hotel and that whole side of the square as well. Traveled on into the community and burned several residences. But the residents of Elkton decided they were not going to let it take the courthouse, which of course at that time probably had a wood shingle roof. Men were lowered from the top of the roof with ropes, and a bucket brigade was set up, and they doused the fire. They doused the roof of the courthouse and saved it from this conflagration that had consumed the rest of the a good part of Elkton at that time. The next year, the winds came again. The next year was even drier. And in 1887, 31 residences were burned in Elkton. Well, what this did is it made Elkton go from a wood frame community to a brick community. You saw a lot of the buildings that are still there today were erected. And if you look at the insurance maps, you can see that Elkton really regrew after those fires. And in 1888, an effort was made to expand the courthouse, and the clock tower, actually the clock was installed in the clock tower, which was an addition to the courthouse, marking, again, another series of growth. In March of 1892, Elkton had one of its biggest events. A 10-acre tract on West Main Street was donated by the city of Elkton to lure the Vanderbilt Training School to choose Elkton as its home. Now, this doesn't sound like such a big thing, but you have to realize that by donating this 10-acre tract of land, which was very prominent, as you may know, it's where the middle school is today. The people who were trying to figure out where to put this school over in Nashville, they chose Elkton. They believed it to be a righteous community that had this beautiful lot it offered, and it beat out Guthrie, beat out Hopkinsville, beat out Russellville, Greenville, and other towns that were vying for this training school. The training school became really a springboard for education that lasted on into the 1950s, because a lot of Elkton's residents attended school there, and people from all over the area. We had a governor of Kentucky there, prominent politician Doc Beecham went to school there. So having this training school in Elkton really changed the community. It was a religious institution. So their people came there training to become ministers. And so Elkton not only had this educational element weaved into it, but it also had the religious element. And like I said, that's another turning point in Elkton's history. By 1903, Public Square was macadamized. Imagine, up until 1903, Public Square had existed, but it was always just a dirt road coming into town and circling the courthouse there. This brought in crushed stone, put in layers, and reduced the mud, really, is what happened. The next decade brought World War I, and Elkton lost some of its residents to World War I. And things changed. The Vanderbilt Training School and its successors actually failed. And in 1925, Elkton again decided to invest in education and purchase the former Vanderbilt Training School campus for Elkton Public Schools, and started really having school in the former Vanderbilt Training School buildings. By this time, Public Square had gone from being macadamized with crushed stone to having either brick or stone pavers. I was told by some of the older people, the previous generation, that they remember how rough it was crossing Public Square in a wagon and going over these joints in the pavers. At that time, of course, traffic went in any direction it wanted on Public Square. So you could go from East Main to Clarksville Street by turning left when you came to Public Square, or you could go from Greenville Road to Russellville Road, just whichever way you wanted. But the advent of the automobile really in the 1930s changed that, and the circular path that we know now was established, even though some refused to do it, and double parking was rampant on the square, and large events clogged the square, but it remained really the heart and the center of Elkton. A new modern era came in the 1930s, which is really identified by the coming of electricity. The Pennyroyal Rural Electric, which still serves the entire region right now, had its first meeting in Elkton on 18 March 1937. So Pennyroyal Rural Electric was born there in Elkton on that date. On the 4th of September in 1939, education made another leap when the $100,000 Todd County High School opened on the former Vanderbilt Training School campus. They demolished one of the old buildings, or both of the buildings there of the former Vanderbilt school, and reused some of them in the new Todd County High School. World War II came. Well, again, we lost many of Elkton's sons, and it really changed a lot because the automobiles had come into prominence. Paved roads had occurred. Now we have asphalt paving going out to the different areas, and the automobile in World War II really affected the railroad service to Elkton, and the NG eliminated the passenger coach. Passengers were forced to ride in the freight caboose after 1942. In 1945, the waterworks, which had really been serving the Hotel Jeff Davis, was expanded into Elkton, and the city of Elkton acquired it from Mrs. J.S. Shanklin, the hotel's owner. And so what had been a private water system became a public system. And this is really one of the first establishments of the public utilities in Elkton. In 7th of October 1949, the Elkton City County voted to install parking meters on Public Square to take care of some of this double parking and traffic problem. Imagine the traffic problem that had been there before parking meters had to be put in. On the 2nd of May 1950, the Elkton School Board had an organizational meeting to talk about expanding the Elkton and Clifty schools. This meeting was protested by people from Allensville, Guthrie, and Trenton, which had their own schools. They saw this as a power grab from Elkton. And as we all know, the schools were consolidated later on. Another page was turned when in January 1951, the city council voted to acquire a parcel on Public Square for a new city hall and put the old city hall, which was behind what's now Weathers Drugstore and the grocery parking lot, they put that up for sale to pay for the new city hall. The early 1950s brought the Korean War. More of Todd's sons died in that war, and things were changing. The Todd County Training School was completed in 1952. This was still the era of segregation, but a new school was built for that population. And in 12th of May, 1957, the government gave the Elkton and Guthrie Railroad permission to abandon service effective 40 days thereafter. So that was really the end. 1957 was the end for the railroad era in Elkton. But we had a new era starting. On the 28th of October, 1961, Elkton dedicated the new airport, Standard Field, which is still in use today. And in 1963, Clifty, Elkton, and Guthrie high schools graduated their final classes. And in August 1963, Todd County Central High School was integrated peacefully in Elkton. Again, another milestone in Elkton's history. The utilities continued to be improved in Elkton. 1963, natural gas came. Water and sewer lines were improved, really to the modern systems that are enjoyed today and still in use. I'm sure some of the residents will remember when everybody started getting the gas lamps in their front yards to show that they had the natural gas in 1963. It became a source of pride for all of the residents. In 1967, on the 23rd of March, there was a protest by the National Farmers Organization, and they came to the Elkton Square and flooded it with milk, protesting the low prices. In other words, they said they would rather dump their milk on the square than to sell it for the low prices. It ran down Greenville Street and it caused quite a mess that day, I'm told. Again, Elkton sent its sons to the Vietnam War, and some didn't come back. But between the 25th of April and the 1st of May in 1971, Todd County had probably its biggest celebration. That was the Todd County Sesquicentennial. And of course, each of the communities celebrated that in part, but none as much as Elkton, when the entire county came to Elkton on several occasions. And it was estimated as many as 20,000 people were in Elkton for the Grand Parade and other sesquicentennial events. And that was just 49 years ago. In 1970, the town clock cable failed and the counterweight dropped from the clock tower. The old courthouse had really seen its better days. And Elkton changed once again when the fiscal court decided to build a new courthouse that was completed in the mid-1970s over on Washington Street. And Public Square became a little bit quieter place. And I think this is probably a good place to stop as we've really covered much of Elkton's early history. We can come back and pick it up here and talk about more modern history when time permits.
Okay, that's good, Gary. And there's several things through that I think reflect the fact that what was happening when you talk about the milk poured out on the square, what was happening nationally was affecting Elkton. The wars affected Elkton. The train travel affected Elkton. There's so many things that while Elkton was growing and developing were the same things happening all over the United States. And I always think the one interesting fact about the railroad is that it didn't turn around. I never remember. It either backed in or backed down to Guthrie or drove in, and I can't remember the direction, but it did one or the other.
When it started out, it would back all the way from Guthrie to Elkton, to the depot. In all the years it ran, that's the way it would happen. But there was a train wreck. I can't remember the exact date, but the train wreck was attributed to the fact that the engine was running backwards. The engineer and the fireman were killed, and a Y was erected near Hearthstone Place. So they could come from Guthrie to Elkton going forward from that time on. I believe it was about 1910. The Y was erected shortly after that. but they still backed from Hearthstone Place to the depot, and then they'd go forward back to Guthrie.
And I believe that wreck was in the Daysville, the Herman area, wasn't it?
That's correct. It was
Yeah.
somewhere near Herman.
Somewhere in that area. Well, Gary, we certainly appreciate your knowledge of history and sharing with us today. And we're going to take you up on the offer to start where we're stopping today, and at some point in the near future to try to catch us up to today. And again, thanks for joining us today. And as we've discussed, we're going to talk about a few other things about the bicentennial and our birthday. You're certainly welcome to stay with us. And again, thanks not only for your knowledge, but for your willingness to share that knowledge pretty well every day on Facebook, but any other time you get a chance to.
My pleasure.
All right.
Again, happy birthday.
All right. I want to mention just a few other things. We had a committee that started in 2019 planning for bicentennial and had a lot of activities scheduled. And as most of you all know, there are a lot of things have had to be canceled, but I want to acknowledge some people who've been helping out along the way. We started out with a committee that consisted of Shelby Knuckles and Carolyn Meadows and Charlotte Myers and Mitzi Page and Linda Withers and Mark Withers and Robin Snarden. Paisley Case helped. And of course, person who coordinates everything in City Hall, Laura Brock, helped. And that committee has continued to function along the way. And hopefully we're going to get to revisit some activities we've had planned and try to do those. I also want to acknowledge that when we started the process, we wanted to recognize people and have people to help sponsor us. And I want to recognize the fact that we had some folks who signed up as sponsors of our bicentennial on the gold level sponsor list. Those folks were the United Southern Bank, Light Rock Radio 98.7 in Hopkinsville, and WHOP Radio in Hopkinsville. And I don't know whether you can see my list, but to acknowledge that these are people who were gold sponsors. We appreciate that completely, and we will, before much longer, be in contact with you to talk about what we're going to continue to do. And I certainly want to recognize those people who signed up at the highest level, the platinum level sponsors for our bicentennial. And those two sponsors are Weathers Drugs and Latham Funeral Home. And Gary mentioned Weathers Drugs, a 100-year-old plus business in Todd County, and the other sponsor we have is a 100-year-old serving community in Todd County, and that's Latham Funeral Home. And just a little bit of a visual to show that we appreciate these folks and know that some of the things that we had talked about doing, we will continue to try to do and communicate with them as we go. Well, another thing with the bicentennial, you want to celebrate a little bit. I don't know of a bicentennial or any type of major event that sometimes doesn't have what we call a bicentennial coin. Well, we're going to reveal our coin today. I'm going to try to show you this on my technology limited ability. It is a coin. If you'll notice, one side of the coin says City of Elkton, Kentucky, and has a picture of an elk. And Gary mentioned the elk. The original town was named after the herd of elk that was somewhere around 1817, 1820. So we're going to go back to using an elk in some of our promotions and on our vehicles and other things. On the reverse side of the coin says Elkton, Kentucky, bicentennial, 1820, 1920. This coin is available right now in limited supplies, but if we sell out, we'll get some more for $5. And if you would like one of these coins, you can call City Hall. We also have a lapel pin. If I can get this up, this lapel pin says Elkton, Kentucky, bicentennial, 1820, 2020. And this lapel pin is $2. And the cost of these items for our bicentennial is really the cost of what we've paid for them. We want our citizens to have something to have a remembrance, and maybe 50 years from now, 100 years from now, when your grandkids or great-great-grandkids have this, they can have some remembrance of, as Gary was talking about, the Bicentennial. So if you'd like to have one of those, call City Hall. Our number at City Hall is 270-265-9877, and we'll arrange to get those to you. We also had planned on today to reveal a new statue on the square. And of course, we weren't able to do all that. Production and management of a lot of things have been slowed down, but I want to show you a picture. And I will tell you the picture is not the best picture because it's a little grainy trying to explain it, but this will represent the statue that will go on the city square sometime this year. It is an elk. As was stated, we started out as Elktown, now Elkton, and this statue will be placed, I don't know the exact date now, but sometime this year. The statue is going to be about an 8-foot high and 6-foot long statue, and this statue has been donated to the city. We had hoped to have a big gathering today and a big gathering tomorrow and had a lot of activities planned, but we all have to improvise where we are. And before I finalize what we're doing today, you know, when we have birthday parties, it's always important who shows up, those who come to the party. Well, I want to tell you, you're all important, but we also need to count you. We've got a U.S. Census going on right now. It's our 2020 census. And if you live in Elkton and you have a P.O. box, you did not get a card about the census. But what we need everyone to do in the city of Elkton, really expand that in Todd County whole, is to go to 2020census.gov and sign up. Again, that's 2020census.gov. And I will say to those of you that live in the city limits, if you need help in getting that census completed, again, call City Hall at 270-265-9877, and we will assist you. Now, you may say, why is that important? Funding that comes to the city, the county, go on the state, the school board, all kind of government agencies depend on our population count. So you are important, and we need to count you. Now, as I've stated several times in our little promos, and again, I will apologize that this is not live. It always seems to amaze me that you practice, you get everything ready, and the day you get ready to do something, something doesn't work. Well, live didn't work, but video will work as well. Today is our birthday. We are celebrating and will continue to celebrate this year, and we may do some other things as it goes into next year. And I know the county was planning on celebrating today too, well, today and throughout the year. And there's still things to be done with what they're planning to do as well. So what I want to do is show you a birthday cake, and we can't have a party without a cake. And I'm going to tell you, and I'm going to end on just showing you the cake. So when you see the cake, this video is going to end. We wished that we could share a piece of this cake with you today. We had planned on sharing cake with you today. But we are also promising that sometime, hopefully in the very near future, but at least this year, that we will have an opportunity to share cake with the citizens of Elkton and Todd County and the surrounding area, because we want to celebrate. And as Gary talked about in our history, and as we'll talk about history later on, we have a lot of great points in our history to celebrate. Growth that's taken place, growth that is taking place. And I think when we look at where we came from in the early 1800s to where we are today, that Elkton, Todd County has a great future. And who knows, what is Elkton going to look like 200 years from now? We're not going to know, but we can dream. And I would ask everyone, while we're talking about what it's going to look like 200 years from now, let's continue to make Elkton grow and develop so it's a place that our citizens want to live and a place that people want to visit. I want to thank you for joining in on this video. of our birthday celebration. And I also have to end by thanking Laura Brock, our city clerk, for taking care of a lot of our technology, and it's not her fault things don't work. But we work hard, she works hard on getting these things done, and it's kind of aggravating when it just don't work. So thank you, Laura. Thanks for celebrating with us. Here is our bicentennial cake. And if you've got cake, cookies, whatever, eat it now. We're going to cut this cake in a few minutes and enjoy it. We look forward to seeing you soon in a public celebration in Elkton. So I'm going to see if I can get the cake in here. Thank you for joining us. Bye.